Begin with a little bit of housekeeping. Thank you, Baruch Day, for putting together a lot of the materials here and taking care of the technical things. Enjoying this. Thank you for my Rabbeim, specifically Rabbi Dovid Steinhauer and other Rabbeim of mine that have helped with a lot of the ideas and sort of putting it together. Although I take full responsibility for the content, sort of made it my own. I'll be speaking for about an hour. If you need to leave, feel free. I'm not insulted. It is long. I do hope to get through at least most of the letter. I can't promise to finish it though. Okay. Again, this letter was written by Rabbi Shimshon of Ostropoli. Who was he? Rabbi Shimshon of Ostropoli was a great nephew of the Maharal of Prague. He was unfortunately murdered in 1648 on the third day of Av. That's the year of Tach during the pogroms. The Cossacks killed him with 300 other scholars in synagogue on the third day of Av. It's very interesting. He had a lot of revelations. Many rabbis came to him in a dream. Now, a lot of great rabbis had, revelations in their dreams. But what was very unique about Rabbi Shimshon is that he actually had a revelation where the angel of death came to him in a dream. And they had a discussion about the years of Tach v'Tat, 1648 and 1649, and the pogroms that happened. And the angel of death tried to negotiate with him to sort of, he told him that if he stops learning Torah, that he'll mitigate the tragedy. And Rabbi Shimshon told him no. That's brought down contemporaneously. It's written down by the talleisim, who of course lived at that time period. So the story is obviously a pretty dated contemporaneous account. Now, in this letter, he's writing to a close friend. Obviously, as you can, I'm sure you've read the letter. I'm going to presume that most people have read at least some parts of the letter, even if you don't understand it. That's sort of what I'm going to try to do tonight to try to explain it. There are copies around, so if you haven't looked through it, you might want to look through it quickly. The beginning of the letter, he's quoting from the Arizal. The Arizal wrote if you look in the Hebrew version, it's about 7 lines in the first page, a little more, 10, 11 lines. It was published in a compilation called Plois Rabbis. Plois Rabbis is not a book that we currently have. It's not extant, but there are many books of the Arizal that are no longer extant that have been quoted previously. He's not the only one to quote this book. It has been quoted elsewhere. We don't know that the book is around today. And the Arizal wrote these couple lines, which we'll go through, and they were extremely cryptic. Very difficult to understand. Nobody knew what the Arizal was talking about. If you look in the English, you're on the first page of the English. It's the Holy Arizal, the next 3 paragraphs. Very difficult to understand. And he had a revelation, he had a dream, and the Arizal came to him and explained to him what he was referring to. Now, if anyone's read through the letter, you'll notice that there was a lot of numbers, there's a lot of names, but the explanation, the meaning, is not really there. The Arizal, in his list, talks again mostly with names and numbers, except in one line, which we'll go through the letter. There's a little bit of narrative in the letter. And we'll try to use that narrative to decode the meaning of what exactly is going on here. So begin, if you're in the English, it's on the second page. We're just going to read the Arizal, and I'll sort of bring in Rabbi Shimshon's explanation as we go through the letter. So he begins the letter, Plois Rabbis. We see that Parai was struck in Egypt with 10 makas through 3,280 angels of death. So that's the first number, 3,280. Where did that number come from and why is it significant? We'll get to it. Okay, that are placed within 3 levels of Tumah, and they have names, Shira, Tamoich, and Bishul. And on top of them, there's an angel called Dalad Lamed Pei Kuf Tes. And on top of him, there's another angel called Tov Kuf Aleph Bereshus. And there are, behold, from the 3rd is lacking 10, from the 4th is missing 6, and from the 9th is missing 6. Those are the most cryptic lines. Nobody knew what in the world he was talking about. What exactly does that mean? What is he referring to? And then he continues. He says the Egyptians were smitten with 10 plagues. On the sea, they were smitten with 50 plagues. Now, if anyone remembers from the Haggadah, there's a section of the Haggadah that specifically deals with this. 10, whatever they got in Egypt, they got 5 times as much on the sea. And there were 3 opinions. One says it was 10 and 50. Another opinion says it was 40 and 200. And the third opinion says it was 50 and 250. So the Arizal explains there were 3 names. One is Shin Pei Vav. It has to do with David HaMelech. Another one is 530, Tov Kuf Lamed, and that has to do with the 40 and the 200. V'Hashem Omar V'Hika, very important here. The name hit. It was the name that spoke and it was hit, and it hit. That's a narrative. What does he mean by that? Okay, and then finally, the name Shin Tzaddik Shin 395, they got 50 and 250. Okay, and the last line of the reason I want to focus on, read in Hebrew, from the plagues, the smiting that God did to the Egyptians, that's how God will heal the exile. Okay, and it explains to us, what I just told you explains to you, Ma Pashu, what was the rebellion, Ma Chotu, what was the sin, Asher Molu Avesenu, that our forefathers sinned. Liyos B'Kor HaBarzal Hazeh, to merit having to go through the Egyptian bondage. Okay, so now we have a big key to the story. A big key to this letter is to understand that these names, the names themselves were responsible. The names themselves smit the Egyptians. And these names will decode for us what was the sin of our ancestors, and it's the same names that will bring us out of the exile, that brought us out of the exile in Egypt. Okay, if I didn't lose you, well, I think I lost myself too. So we don't really know what exactly these things mean. Come in. Until the redemption happened, b'shemes elu, and these names, Dayan Dalet Ayin Beis, Tzadik Dalet Aleph, and Chaf Shin Ches and Beis. And again, it's not exactly clear where he got those names from and why those are significant. So now let's explain the letter briefly. So 3,280, where does that come from? So the Rabbi Shimshon explains that there are 3,280 angels of death. They come from the word lahakos be'egroif, the word egroif, aleph, gimel, reish, fei. Could also be read as aleph is, the letter aleph also means elef. It also means 1,000. Because our counting system works, right? This aleph is singles, aleph through yud, aleph through tes, yud through tzaddik is tens. And then we have kuf through taf. If you add the end letters, it would be tul and tzaddik. We count hundreds. And then what do you get back? You can start right back from the beginning, right? From 1,000. 1,001 is the same number. Elef is aleph. It's the same thing. So aleph gimel is gimel alafim, 3,000s, and reish pei, 280. Okay. And he continues, and these were through the 3 levels of Tumah. And that's where we'll sort of begin the explanation. So what does it mean that there are 3 levels of Tumah? So if anyone remembers from 2 years ago, if anyone's been here for the kosher class, we discussed this a little bit. We touched on the subject. We'll try to explain what are the 3 levels of Tumah. In Hasidic writing, and it's very common in the Kabbalistic writings, the Zohar talks about it, the Shloh talks about it, the Pardes Rimainim talks about it, and many others. They talk about shalosh klipos tmeis, 3 impure husks. There are 3 levels of impurity. They have names. We'll soon see what their names are. When Yecheskel and Eliyahu Hanavi, they merited a divine revelation where they saw God's glory. And in order to see God's glory, they had to go through 3 steps. They had to go through an Eish, a fire, a Ruach, a wind, and Rash, a tempest. In the case of Eliyahu, it's Anon, it's clouds, it's the same thing. There are these 3 barriers for one to reach closeness with God. And what are these 3 things represent? There are 3 cardinal sins. There is the sin of idol worship, idolatry. There's a sin of adultery, of unpermitted, prohibited sexual relationships. And then there's avodah zarah, there is murder. And each of these brings down a certain force to the world of evil. It's a certain barrier in approaching God. God obviously is the basis of reality, and therefore kfir b'Hashem, denying God, idolatry, fundamentally denies the creator of the world. Now, the other 2 sins are between man and his friend, and they're the opposite, in the sense that murder is distancing yourself from he who you should be close with. Murder is pushing away someone who you're supposed to be close with. Murder is never permitted, period. Judgment of execution is not murder. It's judgment. However, when it comes to arayis is a balance. Sexual relationships are obviously something that society needs and is required to continue the world, but there's also a realm of inappropriate use of that function. So Gili arayis is a balance between the 2 of them. If you're familiar with the creation of the world, the Kabbalists call this Bria Yetzira Asiya. Without going into too much detail, Bria is the level where everything is good. Denying everything that's good is denying God. Asiya is the world we live in. That's where most things are bad. That's murder. Murder is something that's never permitted. And then we have Yetzirah in the middle, which is sort of a combination of the two. It needs guidance, sort of how to utilize correctly. And that is arayas, promiscuity, inappropriate sexual activity. Okay. Now, how do you fix these problems? Very simple. Emunah. Emunah, believing in God, that solves the problem of idolatry. Study of Torah is life. The Torah calls itself a book of life. It's kihem chayenu. It's our book of life. It creates a life which vanquishes the force of death. And finally, we have the revelation of God in this world, revealing God's presence. And we'll soon see where that went wrong. But revealing God's presence is what the world is supposed to do correctly. But it could also be managed incorrectly, and then it doesn't reveal God's presence. And that's sort of balance. That's that tension, the balance of arayas. Of Gilui Arayas, the third cardinal sin of adultery, or more accurately, sexual impropriety. Okay, now the prophet speaks of the three barriers to gain entrance to God. What are those? There's Aish, the fire. The fire is something that's very powerful, but it's very useful too. The fire represents the fire of lust, of passion. It's the barrier of arayas. There is Ra'ash. Ra'ash is a storm, a tempest. The word Ra'ash is the same words as Rasha. Rasha is the word the Torah uses. Evildoer is the word the Torah specifically associates with murder. Right? When Moshe Rabbeinu sees one Jew about to hit the other one, he calls him a Rasha. He calls him a wicked one. And Ruach, the spirit, the wind, that represents the barrier of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry. There's another set of names here. On the negative side, they have another set of names, which is called Mashchis Af and Chema. Again, if we're recalling the class we spoke about 2 years ago, before Ma'ariv every night, we say V'hurachim. Why do we say V'hurachim? So it's brought down in the Rekanati, as a medieval scholar. It's also brought down in the Zohar, that there are four forces of evil. Now, there are four, but one of them is able to be rectified, and we'll explain in a moment. And they are Mashchis, Af, Chema, and Oven. Oven is sin. Sin could be rectified through tshuva. The other three are what we call the Sholosh Klipas Tmeis, the three impure husks. Those are remain forever impure. There's no way to rectify them. And Mashchis, Af, and Chema are these same forces, these same barriers that prevent one from coming close to God. And this is what Rabbi Shimshon is mentioning here. What he's saying here is that at some level, what we will find is that there was a sin in our forefathers that needed to be fixed, and the sin needed to be fixed at each of these three levels. And for many reasons, as we'll explore, there was a reason for each of these three. At each of these three levels, there were multiple reasons why we ended up in Egypt. And in Egypt was a crucible to purify these three areas, and we'll discuss that. And the punishment of the Makkais was to solve these three problems. And the redemption that we had in Egypt, and the redemption ultimately at the end of time, is going to revolve around these three variables. There's a lot of words. Fair?
The Makkos were to punish the Egyptians. So how does this rectify the sins of the forefathers?
We'll have to explore that. We'll have to detail.
So I'm on the right track.
So in other words, so let's just summarize what we'll. Now you have the answer to all the questions. Now you can understand the whole letter. I just didn't go through the details. But here's the basic idea that Rav Shimshon is trying to say. Okay, there are three sins. There are three cardinal categories of barriers between man and God.
The ones you just said already.
The ones that we just spoke. And at multiple levels, on multiple generations, by multiple individuals, we failed to rectify these three problems. And because of that, we ended up in Egypt. And that's the last line of the Arizal. We failed at multiple levels. That's how we ended up in Egypt. And in Egypt, we rectify those through things through the Makkos, through the plagues. And ultimately speaking, the final redemption will happen through these same three categories, through the rectification of these three categories. We together? Okay, so now we just need to fill in the details. That's all it is. Just a matter of working through the specifics. Okay, so let's begin. Who is the first one to sin? Adam Rishon, right? He ate from the eight Sadas Toivera. Okay. And before we get to Adam, let's go through the three different levels of impurity that are mentioned in the first line. So he says the names of these three levels are Temoich, Shara, and Bisha. So I'm sure one of you noticed that Shara is the same letters as Rasha. So we got one there. So Shara, that's the cardinal sin of murder. That will be rectified through Torah study, which we'll explore in more detail. The second one is Bisha. Bisha, we said, we explained that Aish is the fire of passion and lust. And that fire is something that has to be controlled. It's not something that can be ignored. It's not something that can be wasted or destroyed. And it's not something that can be entirely permissive. Okay? We have a category the rabbis say that during the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we should not eat nuts, egos. Why? Because egos is the same numerical value as sin, chet. What else has the same numerical value as chet? Toiv. Good. Both 17. Well, so the chet, typically chet, by the way, refers to a chet of promiscuity. And there's a right way for a man to engage that passion, and there's a wrong way. You could have a chet or it could be toiv. It could be either one. If you take the word bisha, what do you get? You get 17 plus Aish. Toiv and Aish. Toiv and chet, they're the same gematria, and Aish, and a fire. So that takes care of the force of immorality. And finally, tamoich. What does tamoich mean? Tamoich literally means to support. It means a guy who ignores the fact that God supports the world. But at another level, the word tamoich is the same letters as chachmais. Chachmais, of course, is the same gematria as das, 474. If you take the ches out of chachmais, the remaining letters are tamoich. Meaning, without going into too much detail here, but 8 is sort of that beyond spiritual number. It's a number of deep connection to God. It's why Hanukkah is 8 days, and why the bris milah is on the 8th day. I don't want to go into that at length here. But if you drop the spirituality from the world, then what you'll end with is the barrier to God, which is idol worship, idolatry. And those are the first three levels. One more point here. Reish Pei, 280. We're 3,280. Where did you get that number from? So 280 is a well-known number. If you take the gematria of all the end letters, that would be end of chaf, end of mem, end of nun, end of fei, and end of tzaddik, all the sofei tevos, then what do you get? 280. What does 3,280 mean? That means that the 280 malachim exist at 3 different planes. And it's exactly the 3 planes that we're discussing. So the forces of 280 exist at all 3 levels. That's the significance of the number 3,280. It means that the 280 exists on each of the 3 levels of the forces of impurity, of the barriers between us and God.
Is 280 good or not good?
280 is not a good number. 280 is the Reish Pei Kach Sarah. It derives from the 288 broken vessels, but that's a separate discussion. That happened in the Alam Nikudim when the vessels were shattered. But that's a separate discussion. So 280, the significance of a number of 3,280 means 1,000, like we explained in the beginning, is a new level starting from the beginning. That's why the Elef is the Aleph. The 1,000 is the 1. The cycle begins anew. And the significance of that number means that there are 280 bad forces that exist at 3 different planes. Okay. 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 Now let's begin by going through the generations to understand what do we do wrong to end up here. So let's explain. So we start with Adam Rishon. Adam Rishon, of course, sinned at each of these levels. So let's explain. The first thing he did was he the Medrash says that he blessed God. That's a euphemism. Okay, that's a euphemism for a sin that's pretty close to idolatry. Okay. The result of his sin brought death and destruction to humanity forever. So we have death, we have Ritzicha there, there's murder. And finally, without going into too much detail here, you can all look this up on your own, but after the sin of Adam Rishon, there was a pagam, there was something lacking in the appropriateness of Adam Rishon's behavior for the next 130 years, which resulted in an army of demons. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, especially in front of mixed crowds. You can look up and explore it on your own. But that was the sin in the category of Gilui Arayos. That is in the category of Gilui Arayos of inappropriate relationships, or an inappropriate use of the sexual desire. Those are the three sins of Adam Rishon. Okay, now, says the Arizal that there were three generations that were brought into the world to fix those sins. There was the generation of Enosh, the generation of the flood, and the generation of the dispersion. They were supposed to rectify the sin of Adam Rishon in each of these three categories. The generation of Enosh was notorious for idol worship. They invented idol worship. They completely failed. The generation of the flood sinned immorally, promiscuity. They failed to rectify the lost souls that Adam Rishon created. And finally, the generation of dispersion, they knew about God. They decided they had their own way. They wanted to take control of the world. The Medrash relates that when someone climbed the tower and they were carrying a brick, if the person fell down, they were perfectly fine with that. As a matter of fact, sometimes they'd even push people off the tower. If the brick fell down, they'd mourn over it to build this tower. Most specifically, what they were doing is they were counteracting the force of Torah, of listening to God's commands. They knew of God, they decided to rebel against him anyway. They failed to listen to God's command. This was a pagam, a lack, a further shattering of the sin of Ritzicha, of murder. And therefore, the entire mess that Adam Rishon created was now further devolved into an even larger mess.
The idea is that Adam did all three sin. He did some aspect of all three.
Of all three categories, correct. Finally, we have Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu is going to fix all the problems. 10 generations from Avram Avinu to Noach, 10 generations from Noach to Adam, he was going to solve the problems. The Gemara asks a question, why did Avram Avinu, what did he do to be told that his grandchildren will suffer in Egypt? What did he do to merit such a abysmal foretelling of his grandchildren's tragedy? So the Gemara has three opinions, and we'll see each of these three opinions lines up with one of these barriers to God. The first opinion is because he doubted God. God said he will inherit Israel. He said, how do I know I will enter Israel? So he failed to listen to God. That at some level was a lack in the barrier to God of idolatry. There was a lack of emunah, a lack of faith in God. Okay. When he fought against the kings of Sodom, by the way, the kings of Sodom, what were their names? One's name was Birsha, which could also be read as Bir Resha. Resha, again, is the force of evil. And the other one is Bera, which is Bira in evil also. It's a side point. So what happened? He went to fight the king of Sodom. The five kings were being assaulted by the four kings, Kedar Omer and his three fellow kings. And Lot lived in Sodom, so Avram went to fight on behalf of Sodom. So what happened? It says, the Gemara says, he gathered his soldiers to fight. Who are these soldiers? These were Torah scholars. And he removed the Torah. By the way, which night did he remove the Torah scholars from the study hall? Pesach night. It happened the night of Pesach. We read about it in the Haggadah toward the end. And it's also brought down in Chumash and Rashi over there, in Parshas Lech Lecha. It was Pesach night. Obviously, they were studying. Can you imagine? They finished the Seder. They went to the hall to study. And he removed the scholars. At some level, that was a lack in Torah study in the sin of murder. And finally, when they finish the battle, what happens? He conquers the four kings, he vanquishes them, and he basically redeems the entire city of Sodom. So the king of Sodom says, basically, take whatever you want, but I want the people. You can give me the people, and you can keep all the booty, all the loot, the entire wealth of the town you can keep. And Avram Avinu consented, and he gave back the people of Sodom. Says the Gemara, there was a taina, there was a problem here. Why did Avram Avinu give back these people? Because you know which people these were? These are the people that were destroyed in the flood. These were the same army of lost souls that Adam Rishon had created. And he should have fixed it. He should not have given them back to Sodom. He should have brought them back. And what happened when they went back to Sodom? We know what happened. It's just a couple of years later where they were entirely destroyed. These people of Sodom were an incarnation of that generation of the flood. They failed to rectify the mistake they made in the past, that category of sin, of immorality, and because of that, they were destroyed. And again, we have now a couple more broken stuff, and they need to be fixed. Okay. The Jewish people go down to Mitzrayim. At some level, there is a lack in each of these three categories for the Jewish people as well. When God tells the angel to split the sea, the angels come to God and they say to God, 1 second, the Mitzrayim worship idols, Jews worship idols. They both worship idols. There was a lack of rectifying the sin of idol worship among the Jewish people in Egypt. Why were they sent to Egypt? Because Egypt was the crucible of idol worship. It was the place of idol worship. They were supposed to rectify the sin of idol worship of Adam Rishon, of Dar Enosh, and of Avram Avinu at some level. Avram Avinu obviously wasn't idol worship. It was some small lack in the commandment of Emunah, faith in God. And the Jewish people were not successful in idol worship. And therefore, they earned a penalty in Egypt. The Medrash teaches that they were locked in Egypt by kishuf, by magical forces that prevented anybody from escaping the land. It was impossible to escape. There were magical forces that held everybody in. The forces of idolatry held everyone in. How did the bondage begin? Pari said to everybody, we're going to build Egypt. Everyone come, I'll participate as well. Pari, the Gemara says he wore a brick on his neck as sort of a necklace. And what did the Jewish people do? They left the study hall, except for Shevet Levi. The tribe of the Leviim did not leave the study halls. They stayed learning, and they stayed learning for all 86 years of the Egyptian slavery. Levi did not work. Levi was not subjugated. Why? Because they continued studying Torah. The Jewish people failed to study Torah. They left to build Egypt. They left the study halls en masse. Because of that, they were, at some level, they suffered in Egypt greatly. They had a bitter experience. They had tremendous subjugation. Moreover, why were they sent to Egypt? Because Egypt was no stranger to murder, as you might expect in a culture that was abundant in immorality and idol worship. Paro would bathe in Jewish children's blood. He would kill hundreds of them, as the Medrash says, every single day. And as a matter of fact, when Moshe Rabbeinu was born, he decided he'll kill all the Jewish children. And that was the crucible of Egypt, was the crucible of trying to rectify the imperfection of a lack of Torah study and murder. And at some level, the Jewish people failed at that. And finally, we have the Jewish people's sins in the selling of Yosef. Again, without going into too much detail here, there is a debate here between Talmud and Zohar, but everyone agrees that Yosef was supposed to have 12 tribes. There was a sin that happened, and whether it is in Talmud Saita, it's brought down the sin occurred in the house of Ashes Potiphar when he refused Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar's advances, but yet there was still at some level a minor sin. And in Zohar, it says that it was the brother's fault when they threw him into the pit of scorpions. He was so afraid, and because of that, he lost the ability to have 10 tribes. He only had 2 tribes. The fact that the brothers sold Yosef was a destruction in the soul of a Jew. And therefore, because of that, they were worthy for subjugation in a land notorious for immorality. Egypt was Erevas Aretz. It means the promiscuity of the land. It was a promiscuous culture. And they had to suffer in Egypt to try to rectify that sin. Now, of all the sins, that one specifically, they were quite successful. The Talmud, in Parshas, I believe it's in Nosei or Halaischa, the families of Jewish people are appended with a hey in the beginning and a yud at the end. God testifies that despite the fact that Jews were in bondage for 86 difficult years and 210 overall, there was only a single incidence of immorality, which was a shocking thing to contemplate. Obviously, they were very, very successful in upholding their faithfulness, their loyalty. And at that level, there was some tikkun, there was some rectification of that sin. Okay. As a penalty for selling Yosef, as a penalty for failing at the level of Yosef at Tzaddik, and also partially for joining Egyptian culture, they had the penalty of suffering the loss of their children. And now we get to the Makkos. The Makkos here are supposed to solve all the problems. The Makkos are going to come and take care of, rectify all the problems here. And that's where we get into the next category. We talk about the angel of Al-Kul Masar Nikra Tov Kuf Aleph, the angel called Tov Kuf Aleph Bereshis. Tov Kuf Aleph is 501. Where did he get that number from? So if you read the letter, Rabbi Shimshon says, this is in the English, it's on the second page. And we'll be seeing, it's on the second page, and then we'll be seeing also on the third page in the second paragraph. Okay, so let's explain. If you count up the numerical value of all the Makkos, you get 3,280. And if you count up the first letter of each of the Makkos, you get 501. But only if you count them in a very specific way. How do you have to count them? You have to count them as they're written in the Torah. The third Makkah Erev is spelled without a vav. The third Makkah Kinim is spelled without a vav. Without a yud. Kinim is spelled chaser, without a yud. And Erev, the fourth Makkah, is missing 6. It's missing a vav. And the ninth Makkah, which is Choshech, is also missing a vav. Like it is written in the Torah, not like it's written in the Haggadah. And that will get you to 3,280. And that was that mysterious line of the Arizal. Behold, the third is lacking 10, the fourth is lacking 6, and the ninth is lacking 6. That was the explanation. And the Tov Kuf Aleph, you add the first letters of each of the Makkos, you get Tov Kuf Aleph. Tov Kuf Aleph is a major secret. The number Tov Kuf Aleph is the same numerical value as he points out in the letter that would be on the third page of the letter in English in the second paragraph. It's the same numerical value of Eis Asher. Asher is a conjunctive word. It basically means in most cases it means that. And it's the reference that God alludes to when he says, Eis Asher Hisalalti b'Mitzrayim. That which I made a mockery to the Egyptians. There's another secret in Asher, which is that it appears in many deep words. The middle letters you'll find are Asher. For example, the word Yisrael, the outer letters are Li, the inner letters are Asher, Aleph Shin Resh. All right, Yisrael, Shin Resh Aleph, in the middle letters, it's Asher. Same 501. Similarly, take the word Bereshis, right? What's in Bereshis? Take the middle letters, it's Bias Asher. A is a Bias Asher Tivnuli. What's the house of God? It's hinted out in the first word in the Torah. It's already hinted at in Bereshis. Bereshis has the middle words of Asher. So Asher is a force, it's a conjunctive force. It comes to either reward or punish. And that's why over here it comes to punish the Egyptians and to reveal what the Makkos were about. And now we try to reveal the secret of the Makkos. You group the Makkos, we get three. We'll skip sort of the last line and try to explain this first. We have the Makkos we have 3 groups of Makkos. The Tzach, Adash, Ba'achav. The Tzach is the first 3. Adash is the second 3. Ba'achav is the last 4. Says the Chidah, there were 3 categories of punishment that was given to the Egyptians. The first one were annoyances, serious annoyances. You have Dam, blood, Tzfardea, the frogs, and Kinim, the lice. They were very annoying. The next 3 come what? Death. Arayv, the wild animals, they come to kill. Dever, the death of the animals. And Shchin. It appears in the Chidah that Shchin was permanent. The blisters that they got, they never recovered from. In the Mak of Shchin. And the last 4 were hands of God. And they come from things that you look up to, right? So you have Ba'achav, you have Borod, comes from the sky. Arba, Choshech, thick darkness. Arba is grasshoppers, obviously locusts coming from up. And Makas B'charis, where God smites all the Egyptian firstborns. And those 3 categories, we have the lack of, they lose their enjoyment in life for the Egyptian sin of immorality. They get killed because they killed. And they have to look up at God because they worshiped idols. Now, the 3 names that come to redeem the Jewish people are coming to fix these problems. They're going to fix them. How are they going to do that? So if you look at the last line of the letter on the first page, on the English side, it would be Here we are. It's in the first page in the fourth paragraph. And God rectify using the following names. Last line: Dalet Ayin Beis, Tzadik Dalet Aleph, Chof Shin Ches Beis. And if you look in the third paragraph on the last page, he explains that where do these names come from? It's the first. If you take the Tzach Hadash B'Chav and you write them out, right, and you read them downwards. So the Dalet from the Tzach, the Ayin from Adash, the Beis of B'Chav, you have Dalet Ayin Beis. Go to the second letter of each one, right, and then you get Tzadik Dalet Aleph, and then you go to the third letters and the last two of the last group of four. So you have Chof Shin Ches Beis. Together? Okay. Now, that's the rectification. What does that mean? So let's explain this. In the Haggadah, we learn there are two categories of makkos. A second here. We have Isais, Meifsim, and Meira Gadol. That's part of the Haggadah. What does the author of the Haggadah explain to us? What does Isais mean? Isais Zehadam. Meifsim, what does that mean? I'm sorry. But Isis Zehamata. Isis is a stick, Meifsim Zehadam, Meira Gadol is Gila Shechina. So we have the stick, the blood, and the revelation of God. So let's explain each one. What is an ice? So first of all, you should realize that the word most commonly used for describing the miracles of the plagues is the word ice. The word ice is a common way to describe. What does the word ice mean? Ice means a sign. It means it's a miraculous event that happens, a sign of God. But what else does it mean? What else is the word ice? A letter. Ice means a letter. And that's the mystery of this letter. The letter of Rabbi Shimshon is a bunch of letters. When the Arizal says the names were the actual force of destruction, it's exactly as it's written in the Torah. It's the ice. It's the letters here that they unravel the secret mystery of why we ended up in Egypt, what we did wrong to end up here, and it will unravel the mystery of what these makkos are about, what are these plagues all about, and it will unravel the mystery of the Geula, of how we'll be redeemed. It's all in these letters. It's all about the letters. It's all about these numbers. It's unbelievable. Okay, so let's explain now. Okay, says the Ramban, what's an ice? An ice is something that occurs naturally. It's unusual, but it's a natural occurrence. What's unique about an ice is that it was predicted. A prophet comes and says, this is going to happen, and it happens. There's something unusual about a plague of grasshoppers? No, it happens from time to time. You read the history books, you can look around today in the world, it happens. Is there anything unusual with large amount of frogs jumping out? No. It's an unusual occurrence, but it's not particularly miraculous. What was miraculous was that it was predicted, and they knew it was going to happen. That's an ice. A meifis is straight miracle. And Meira Gadol, a revelation of God. These are the things that reveal God's glory in the world. So now let's look at the other. Let's look at the letters that will fix the problem. The letters that rectified the three initial sins of why we ended up here. So the names are the ones we just saw. Dalet Ayin Beis. Dam, Arayv, and Barad. Okay? All of these three things were totally miraculous. They were Meifsim, right? Meifsim Zehadam. Dalet Ayin Beis. Meifsim is a miracle. A Meifis is a miracle that is not a natural. Mofsim, Mofes. As we read in the Haggadah, we have Ba'aises, B'Meifsim, B'Meira Gadol. Meifes is a straight miracle. These were all straight miracles. Barad was a miraculous combination of hail and fire coming down from above. We have Arayv, where God specifically says, Hareini Sholech Kol Magay Faisal. All of God's plagues are basically encapsulated in Arayv. An extremely unusual event where animals from across the globe basically converged on Egypt to murder the Egyptians. And you have Dam, which is the miraculous turning of the Nile to blood. Next group. We have Tzfardea, Dever, and Arba. Those are Isis. Those are things that can happen. Tzfardea is the frogs, Arba the grasshoppers, and Dever the animals suddenly dying, a plague. Those are predicted by a prophet. That's what made them unique. So they're Isis. And then we have Meira Gadol. These are the things that are miraculous. What are they? Kinim. What happens in Makas Kinim? The Egyptians say, Eztba Elokim, it's the finger of God. We don't know what to do about it. Next one. Shchin. What happens by Shchin? The same sorcerers that recognized that kingdom came from God, they couldn't stand in front of power. Again, they were forced to recognize God as the king. Moira Godel. They were forced to recognize the revelation of God. Next one. We have Chayshach. What does it say by Chayshach? Nobody was able to get up. They were all stuck. And finally, we have Makas B'chayres, where they all recognize that God is here. So to solve the problem, we have Isos Mosim and Moira Godel. We have natural events predicted by a prophet. We have miracles, and we have revelation of God. These come to rectify the three rectifications necessary to cross the barriers and get to God. So let's explain. One second. Okay. The straight miracles, those were to counteract the force of idolatry. To reveal God's presence in the world, that was the Moira Gadol that's supposed to fix the sin of those souls that went in the wrong places. Those souls that were wasted by Adam Rishon are now supposed to be rectified by revealing God's glory. The revealing of God's glory through the category of Makkos called Moira Gadol, which we said was Kinim, Shchin, Chayshach, and Makas B'chayres, was to rectify the sin, was to serve as the rectification by revealing the glory of God that was lost by those lost souls of Adam Rishon, by the lost souls of the Dor HaMabul, by those lost souls of Sodom that did not come with Avraham Avinu to go back to God. Instead, they were destroyed in Sodom. And it's the lost soul of Yosef Tzaddik that was sold by the Jewish people. And that's coming to be fixed by a revelation of God, by those makas that are specifically to reveal and to counteract those forces, that specific force. Okay, and finally we have Isis. Isis, we said, are natural occurrences, but what's unique about them is that they're predicted by a prophet. That's the Torah. That's the Torah. That if you listen to God, then you will see that the reality is explained by God's commandments, by Torah. And the Isis come to rectify the sin of murder, which is, as we explained, is closely associated. It can be rectified through the fulfillment of Torah, which was explained. Torah is the life force that sustains us as Jews. Okay, so that now we've taken care of. So now let's just summarize where we're at. So we explained how we ended up in Egypt. We explained the three categories of sins of those three levels of impurity, of how we got down to Mitzrayim. Now we explain how the Egyptians were smitten with those three specific categories, right? Tatzach, Adash, Ba'achav. Tatzach, we said, those they lost their conveniences, right? They lost a lot of enjoyment in life, and they couldn't eat they had blood, frogs, and lice. Then they were punished for murder. They were murdered. They had Orov, Dever, and Shchin, right? Which Shchin we explained was permanent. And then they had, for the idolatry, they had to look up at God for Arba, Chaysha. What am I missing here? Barad, Chayshach, and Makas B'chayr. Barad, Arba, Chayshach, and Makas B'chayr. Bachav. And we explained that when we rectified it, the same Makkos served as a rectification in the opposite order, in a different order, which was in the downward order. So if you take the first word of the Tzach, the first letter of Adash, the first letter of Achav, that created the force of Maifes. Then we had Tzadik Dalet Aleph, Tzfardeya, Dever, and Arba. We said the first was the force of Maifes. The second, that was what I said. The second one was the force of Isis, and finally the third one was Mara Gadol. That's when everyone was sort of afraid of God. They could not stand in front of God, literally. So we explained that. And now we get to the final explanation. 15 minutes left. The final explanation, which is to explain, so how do we bring the Gula? How do we bring the redemption? How are we rectifying this? How does this get us out of Egypt? Okay, and this is so I went a little bit out of order here. Now we're at the second, second here, we're at in the English, we're at the the third paragraph on the first page, the third paragraph on the same page in the second line, and furthermore, that which we find, which is explained on the, it's on the third page on the second to bottom paragraph. Okay, so now we'll explain about the 10, 50, 50, 200, 50, 40, 250, 250. This is the secret of redemption. And now let's try to do that. Okay. So he explains to us as follows. If you're in the letter, he says that the number 386 teaches the secret of David ben Yishai. And it's through that force that we have 10 and 50. 10 plagues in Egypt, 50 at the sea. The second force is 530. And that equals 40 and 200. And the final force is 395, and that's 50 and 250. What does that all mean? So as Rabbi Shimshon writes, to explain this, okay, so he explains that the three authors, the names of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, are all these gematrias. These names are the same names as the same numerical value as the name of these three authors, these three opinions. So let's explain one by one. Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili equals 386, which is the name that the Arizal was alluding to. Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion is 10 and 50. 10 plagues in Egypt, 50 at the sea. Okay. He also alludes to us that David ben Yishai is the same 386. David ben Yishai. Now clearly here, that's an allusion to the Gula, to the redemption. Mashiach, who David ba'atzmai, as the Zohar writes. He is an incarnate of David. As a matter of fact, the word Adam can be divided into Aleph for Adam, Dalet for David, Mem for Mashiach. It's Adam, David, Mashiach. David incarnates as the Mashiach, as the Goel, as the Redeemer. Okay. Finally, we have the next one is Tov Kuf Lamed, 530. Okay, what is Tov Kuf Lamed? Tov Kuf Lamed equals to Rabbi Eliezer. Eliezer's opinion is that it's 40 and 200. What does that mean? What does 40 and 200 mean? What is Rabbi Eliezer? We'll have to explain what that means. He doesn't tell us any more details of exactly what the secret of Rabbi Eliezer is. And finally, Rabbi Akiva equals 395, and that sort of explains the mystery. Okay. Now, what exactly does that mean? Why is that significant? What exactly does it mean that we have 386, 395, and 530? So let's explain. What he's referring to here is that when God redeems us at the end of time, there are going to be three redeemers. We know their names. There's Mashiach ben David, there's Mashiach ben Yosef, and there is an individual called Eliyahu Hanavi. He comes. Eliyahu Hanavi brings somebody with him whose name is Kayan Tzedek. If you're familiar, if anyone remembers by a bris, in one of the Harachmans we mentioned Kayan Tzedek. He comes together with Eliyahu Hanavi. Each of these three people comes to counteract one of those three initial sins, and it comes to rectify those three barriers that prevent us from getting to God. Let's explain. David ben Yishai, we said, Mashiach ben David, what does he come? He's the gematria of 386. What else is gematria 386? Shechina, God's presence on earth. Kabbalistically, David HaMelech brings the Shechina in. David HaMelech is the Malchus. God's presence in the world is brought down by David HaMelech. So David HaMelech and the Mashiach, they're coming to redeem us, that we should be completely faithful to God. We should have faith in God, be loyal to God, and not turn toward idolatry. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the Arizal writes in Shara Gagulim, was a soul, a spark of David HaMelech. And that's why he's the one who brings forth the power of simple faith in God. What's simple? 10 is 10, and 50 is 50. And if it says that in Egypt there were 10 plagues, and on the sea we know that there were 5 times as many, because it says yad. By the plagues in Egypt, we use the word etzba, a finger. At the sea, what do we say? It was a yad Hashem. It was the hand of God. So it was 5 times as many. It's very simple. 10 is 10, 50 is 50. That's Rabbi Yossi Aglili. He's going to rectify the sin of Adam, of not following God, of ignoring God, of idolatry, and he will bring us to unity, to faith, and loyalty with God. Okay, next we have Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is 530. 530. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer brings forth the Mashiach of Mashiach ben Yosef. We'll explain that Rabbi Eliezer, the Medrash relates that when Moshe Rabbeinu came up to heaven, he wanted to understand the secret of Parah Aduma. And he couldn't understand the secret. And then he saw that there was a scholar, Rabbi Eliezer it was, and he was explaining the laws of Parah Aduma. As a matter of fact, the first Mishnah of Masechtas Parah begins with Rabbi Eliezer Omer. How old does a Parah Aduma have to be? A red heifer. So Rabbi Eliezer brings back the Koyach of Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu's place in the spiritual structure is called Das Toiv. And if you take Mem for Moshe, Das Toiv, you get 530. Moshe Rabbeinu is coming to bring back the Koyach HaTorah in the world, to rectify the sin of murder, to bring life into the world. And that will incarnate as Mashiach ben Yosef. And that's the force that Rabbi Eliezer brings to the world, multiplying everything by 4. We'll leave the exact number of 4, we'll leave that for a different time. Finally, we have Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva is 395. Who does Rabbi Kiva represent? Eliyahu Hanavi V'Kohen Tzedek is Gematria 395. What does Eliyahu Hanavi come to do when he brings us back? Last mission, Idias, it says, Eliyahu Hanavi comes to purify the Jewish families. Laheshav leiv aves albonav leiv banam alavoisam. There was an original sin of Adam Arishon. What was the sin? The souls went flying everywhere. They were totally lost and abandoned. We tried to fix it in the Dor Mabel failed. The Anshe Sedoim that Avram Avinu was supposed to fix failed too. They ended up being destroyed in Stein. And Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come around and purify all those souls. He's going to rectify the force of bringing that which went to the impure forces. He will bring it back to God. He will reveal God's presence. He will fix the sin, the barrier of Gilui Arayos, of immorality. Okay. And with two more. 5:22. 8 minutes left. Okay. Let's explain here. The office at the end of the Toichacha, Toichacha is the harsh words God speaks to us at the end of Chumash Vayikra, Parshas Bechukaisai. We end off with Va'afes Brisa Yaakov. God says, despite all these punishments, despite all this rebuke, I will remember the bris, the covenant of Yaakov. But what's unique about the way Yaakov is spelled there? Yaakov is spelled with a vav. Yaakov throughout the Torah is Yud Ayin Kuf Veis, and over there it's spelled Yud Ayin Kuf Vav Veis. Says Rashi in the name of a medrash, Yaakov Avinu wanted to make sure that his grandchildren will survive all the rebukes of God. And how did he do that? He went to Eliyahu Hanavi. And he said, Eliyahu Hanavi, I'm taking the vav from your name. Eliyahu Hanavi is Aleph, Lamed, Yud, Hey, Vav. He said, Eliyahu Hanavi, give me the vav. There are 5 times in Torah that Yaakov is spelled Yud, Ayin, Kuf, Vav, Vez, Molei. And 5 times that Eliyahu Hanavi is spelled without the vav. He took 5 times the vav from Eliyahu Hanavi. He said, I'm keeping it. I want to make sure that at the end of the time, you're going to come back and make sure that all my grandchildren, all those souls that went where they shouldn't have gone, all have a rectification. That's why Rabbi Kiva comes to the world. Rabbi Kiva is the son of a convert. Rabbi Kiva is a Ben Gerim. And Rabbi Kiva comes to gather all the souls, that same koyach that Eliyahu Hanavi is going to have at the end of time, with that vav. With the 5 times of vav, the 5 times 6, 5 times the letter vav. And that's where Rabbi Kiva comes and multiplies everything by 5. He says it was 50 and 250. Okay. So what does this all mean practically? Okay. Try to end off that we have the Seder night. The avoid of the Seder is these 3 things. We have Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Pesach is that in Egypt, we unfortunately sinned in idol worship together with all the Egyptians, like we explained. And Pesach is to remember that God will just pull us right out. If we have faith in God, then we can escape. We can escape the sin of idol worship. It was an easy way out. We have Maror. Maror is the suffering that what happens when we remember on Pesach. We eat the Maror and remember the suffering we had in Egypt. Why do we have that suffering? Because we left the Beis Medrash. We left study hall just to build a nice Egypt. And therefore, we eat the Maror. And finally, we have matzah. Matzah is this sort of dichotomous thing, right? So we start off the Seder, we say, halach ma'anya. What does that mean? This is the bread of the poor man. And then we say, Rabbi Gamliel haya omer, Pesach matzah mar, matzah al shuma. Why are we eating matzah? Because our ancestors, when they left Egypt, they were leaving Egypt, right? They're leaving Egypt. They're being redeemed, and their bread didn't have enough time to rise. Matzah is both the bread of affliction, of suffering, and it's also the bread of redemption. It's that balance of arayas. It's a lust that we need to have, but we can't lose control of it. And as part of our Seder this year, we can sort of focus on strengthening our connection to God in each of these three categories, so that we merit, La'asad Lavi, we have Geula, Vel Yoan Avi, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, Meher B'Yameinu. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. If anyone has any questions, feel free. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed as much as the tens of hours I put into this.
Have you been reading this before Pesach for a long time? Or
I said this has taken me at least tens of hours.
But did you just find this?
No, I've been researching this for a very long time, years at this point. Yeah. So there's a custom specifically. Oh, we should finish off. We have another minute. We should finish off. Why is the custom to read it specifically in Erev Pesach? It's like we pointed out. One of the Moshe Rabbeinu, we said there were three forces: Mashkas, Af, and Chema. Moshe Rabbeinu conquered one of them, Mashkas. When did he conquer it? Mashkas is destruction. We didn't go into details of Mashkas, but we explained Mashkas was the force of Gilei Arayos. When did he conquer that force? Together with the Jewish people's strengthening and immorality while they were in Egypt, the fact that they were loyal, they maintained fidelity. There was there was one incident of adultery. Because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu conquered the force of Mashkas on Erev Pesach. When Moshe Rabbeinu fought against the Amalekim, he had to counteract all these three forces. But Moshe Rabbeinu himself said he was I was afraid of the force of Af and Chema. Af is with an Aleph, Chema is with a Ches, Mashkas is with a Mem. Moshe Rabbeinu took care of the force of Mashkas on Erev Pesach. Af is with the letter Aleph, he needed Aaron to stand at his side on one side. And Chema is with a Ches, he needed Hur on the other side. The three of them, they were able to conquer the force of Amalek. Moshe Rabbeinu alone wasn't able to deal with it. That's why we read this letter Erev Pesach. Because Erev Pesach, the force of Mashkas is subdued. It's subdued. And because of that, anyone who reads this letter in Erev Pesach is promised by Rabbi Shimshon, it's a spiritual promise, that they will merit not to die an untimely death in an unusual manner. For that year.
Can you read it in English?
For that year. Yeah. I presume you can read it in English. So there's sort of a question among the commentaries. Some say it's the night, it's actually during the Seder or right after the Seder. Some say you should read it before that afternoon. Some say early in the day, some say later in the day. But anytime between that morning and late evening, you're good.
Now that you've done all this, I want to see the chart. You must have like an amazing chart of all these threes.
So here's my notes for the day. Yeah, that's it.
Next year I'm looking for like beautiful printed out charts.
Okay, thank you for coming.
So